There is something almost no one sees about childhood trauma. Not the bruises you might remember, not the raised voices that still echo faintly, not even the sharpest memories that have followed you into adulthood. The deepest trauma is quieter. It does not shout, it whispers. It hides itself in the fabric of your everyday choices, weaving through how you love, how you trust, how you protect yourself from being hurt again. It disguises itself as your personality, as your preferences, as the way you say, "That's just who I am." But what if the very patterns you believe are part of your nature were never you at all? What if the reason you keep finding yourself in the same heartbreak, the same self-doubt, the same exhausting cycles is hidden where you never thought to look? You've lived this cycle enough times to recognize its rhythm, even if you pretend not to. A relationship begins, and at first everything feels electric. Your heart races, your body leans forward, and for a moment you believe this might finally be the one that saves you. You let yourself imagine a different ending. You let yourself hope that this time will not collapse into silence. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cracks begin to show. A late reply sends your mind into spirals of doubt. A quiet pause in the room feels louder than thunder. You begin shrinking yourself again, carefully calculating what parts of you are safe to reveal and what parts must remain hidden if you are to be loved. Even as you promise yourself that this time will be different, your body betrays you, pulling you back into the same choreography it has always known. Self-abandonment disguised as love. But this cycle does not confine itself to romance alone. It seeps into friendships, where you give until you are empty, but hesitate to ask for the smallest kindness in return, terrified that your need will drive them away. It seeps into work, where you push yourself past every limit, overextend your energy, and still end the day convinced you have not done enough to be truly seen. It seeps into family, where you slip into roles that were never yours to carry, becoming the peacekeeper, the performer, or the invisible one who learned to survive by disappearing. Everywhere you look, the theme repeats itself. You bend until you nearly break, silence your truth until your voice is barely a whisper, and exhaust yourself in the hope that this time, finally, love will stay without demanding your disappearance. And when the cycle inevitably repeats, when the closeness you longed for collapses into distance once again, you turn the blade inward. You tell yourself it is your fault, that you are too much, too needy, too complicated. Or you swing in the opposite direction and become unreachable, building walls so high no one could ever climb them, convincing yourself you don't need anyone at all. But beneath both masks, whether of desperation or detachment, the wound is the same. It is the ancient fear that true intimacy will harm you, that letting someone all the way in will only end in abandonment, and that if you are left behind one more time, you may not survive the fall. This is the invisible cycle, the hunger for closeness colliding with the terror of it, and you are not imagining it. The repetition is not an accident. Toxic relationships do not enter your life by random chance again and again. They are magnets pulled by threads you cannot see, threads tied to vows you made long before you had words to name them. Think back to the times you whispered in the dark, "I will never let myself be hurt like this again." Those vows did not vanish with time. They carved themselves into your nervous system, teaching your body to chase what is familiar. Even when the familiar is painful, your mind may chase love, but your body chases recognition, and so it finds the same story, the same characters in different faces. This is why healing feels so elusive. You tell yourself you should know better, that you should recognize the red flags, that you should already have broken the pattern. But patterns live deeper than your thoughts. They are etched into the muscles that tighten when someone looks at you too closely, into the breath that shortens when someone says, "I love you," into the restless way you cannot relax even in moments of peace. The repetition is not a failure of willpower. It is a code your body has been running for decades, a code written for survival, not for happiness. And logic alone cannot rewrite it. Only recognition and compassion can. And here is the truth you've been circling, perhaps without realizing it. The cycle of toxic relationships is not proof of your brokenness. It is proof of your endurance. What you call sabotage is the echo of a younger self who once did whatever it took to survive. The patterns that haunt you now were once brilliant strategies, forged in moments when love was scarce and danger was near. You are not cursed, and you are not condemned to repeat this forever. You are simply following a map drawn long ago by a child who needed it. The pain is not random. The repetition is not coincidence. It is memory. And memory, once seen, can finally begin to transform. There comes a moment, if you are willing to trace the thread back far enough, when you realize the pattern did not begin in adulthood. It did not begin with your last heartbreak or your first toxic relationship. Its roots reach further, back into the years when you were small, when you reached out for love with open hands and found that the world could not always meet you where you needed it to. Not every child endures violence or abandonment that can be named easily. Sometimes the wound is quieter, more elusive. It is in the half-attention of a distracted parent, the conditional smile that only appeared when you performed correctly, the invisible pressure to carry emotions that were never yours. It is in the moments when your needs were too much for the room, when your tears went unanswered, when your joy was silenced because it was inconvenient. These are the traumas that rarely get named, because they do not explode, they seep. As a child, you did not analyze or rationalize these experiences. You simply felt them. You felt the sting of absence, the heaviness of being unseen, the confusion of wondering why love felt unpredictable. And because a child cannot hold the weight of believing their caregivers failed them, the mind turned inward. The unspoken conclusion became, it must be me. If they turn away, it must mean I asked for too much. If they grow cold, it must mean I did something wrong. If they cannot love me consistently, then perhaps I am unlovable. And from these wordless conclusions came vows, small promises made in the secret chambers of the heart. I will not need again. I will not cry. I will protect myself from disappointment by expecting nothing. These vows were not flaws. They were brilliant acts of survival. Imagine being so young, so vulnerable, and carrying emotions too large for your body. How else could you endure them except by building walls around your heart, teaching yourself to anticipate rejection before it arrived, numbing yourself to longing so it would not burn you alive? These strategies were shields, crafted not with logic but with instinct, and in the moment they were born, they worked. They kept you safe enough to move forward, to keep breathing, to keep growing in a world that often failed to notice how much you needed to be held. But here lies the hidden cost. Those shields did not dissolve when you grew older. They fused into your identity. What once was a vow whispered in childhood became a script for adulthood. You carried into relationships the same determination to expect little, to silence your needs, to brace for the moment of abandonment. You carried into friendships the same instinct to give more than you received, so no one could ever accuse you of being demanding. You carried into your work the same desperation to prove your worth endlessly, because part of you still believed that love, or even recognition, had to be earned with performance. The walls that once shielded you became the invisible architecture of your life. This is why so many people never connect the dots. They look at their adult relationships and think, why do I keep choosing the wrong people? Why do I sabotage myself? Why can't I let love in? They do not realize these are not random mistakes. They are the echoes of childhood strategies. The forgotten child within is still steering, still protecting, still trying to keep the vow alive. If I don't need, I cannot be disappointed. If I don't trust, I cannot be betrayed. If I disappear, I cannot be abandoned. It is not that you are broken. It is that a younger version of you is still holding the wheel. And here is the most important truth. None of this was your fault. You did not choose to grow up in an environment where love was conditional, inconsistent, or absent. You did not fail at being a child. The world failed at meeting you with the safety and tenderness you deserved. The patterns you carry are not evidence of weakness, but of wisdom. The wisdom of survival. But survival is not the same as living. And if you are listening to these words now, it may be because some part of you is ready to stop surviving and start living again. To loosen the vows, to soften the shields, to remember that what you once thought was your protection has now become your prison. When you look at your life today, it may seem as though these old wounds are nowhere to be found. You go about your days, you meet people, you build careers, you chase goals. Yet beneath the surface the same silent script plays out again and again. In relationships, you may feel drawn with magnetic force to people who cannot love you fully, who echo the inconsistency you knew as a child. At first, they ignite something familiar, a fire that feels alive, but soon the cracks appear, the coldness, the distance, the absence of safety. And despite knowing better, despite telling yourself you deserve more, something inside clings, not because you want to suffer, but because your nervous system has learned to confuse longing with love. Each disappointment feels less like chance and more like destiny, as though life itself is conspiring to remind you of the first vow: do not expect love to last. In friendships, the pattern wears a different face. You become the one who gives endlessly, who listens without limit, who bends to accommodate everyone else's needs. And yet, when it comes time to ask for help, your throat closes. You silence yourself, convincing yourself you don't want to burden anyone. On the rare occasion you do reach out, you feel guilty for needing it all, as if receiving support were a crime. Over time, this creates a quiet resentment, a sense that you are invisible, that no one shows up for you the way you show up for them. But beneath the resentment lies a deeper wound. The belief that you don't deserve reciprocity, that to be loved, you must always give more than you take. It is not selfishness that drives this imbalance, it is the echo of a child who once learned, if I am easy, if I do not need, maybe they will stay. At work, the same wound can shape your ambition. You throw yourself into projects, over-deliver, push yourself beyond exhaustion, hoping that at last someone will notice your worth. Praise may come, but it never lands. Achievements pile up, but they do not fill the hollow inside. And so you strive harder, adding more tasks, more hours, more responsibility, as though recognition were a prize always just out of reach. And when it does not arrive, you blame yourself. Perhaps I am not talented enough, not smart enough, not strong enough. But the truth is, no external reward could ever heal the vow made in childhood, because the wound was never about performance. It was about love withheld when you were most vulnerable. And until you see this, you will keep working harder but never feel whole. Even in your own body, the imprint of the past lingers. Perhaps intimacy makes you anxious, and what should be tenderness feels like threat. Perhaps silence makes you restless, because calm was never safe in your childhood home. Conflict always lurked just beyond the quiet. Or perhaps joy itself feels suspicious, as if every good moment is only a setup for the next fall. These are not random quirks, they are the nervous system's way of remembering. What you once survived by bracing for impact, you now continue to reenact without knowing why. And so you live divided, wanting connection but fearing it, longing for peace but mistrusting it, aching for love but running from it when it arrives. This is where so many people feel the sharpest despair. They ask themselves, why can't I break this pattern? Why can't I accept the love I'm given? Why do I keep ending up in the same places? And because they cannot find an answer, they assume the worst, that something must be wrong with them. But nothing is wrong with you. What you call sabotage is the body's attempt to keep you safe. What you call failure is the echo of vows made long ago. And what you call brokenness is simply survival still running long after the danger has passed. You are not cursed. You are not defective. You are carrying a map that was written before you were old enough to hold a pen. If any of this feels familiar, if you hear your own story woven through these words, know that you are not alone. There are countless others who live in the same quiet cycles, who carry the same vows, who have mistaken their survival strategies for their nature. And if something inside you stirred as you listened, let it be spoken. Share below what part of this mirrors your life, not for attention but for recognition. Because the moment you name your truth, the silence begins to break, and when the silence breaks, healing begins to move. When you look at your own life, it is easy to judge the patterns that keep repeating. You see yourself pushing away someone who tried to love you, or retreating when opportunities arrive, or freezing in the very moments you wished to shine. On the surface, it feels like weakness, like something broken in you that refuses to let good things stay. But if you go underneath the surface, deeper than the judgments and the labels, you will discover something startling. Those very reactions are not failures. They are memories of survival, woven so deeply into your body that they appear as instinct. Long before you had the language to describe fear or abandonment, you had already built ways to keep yourself alive. What you now call sabotage is the echo of those ancient strategies, still loyal, still protecting, even when the danger is gone. It helps to imagine the younger version of yourself standing in an unpredictable world. Each time safety disappeared, that child crafted a small spell, a quiet vow, a code written into your nervous system. Do not trust too quickly, do not need too much, do not show your real self. These promises were brilliant because they kept you from shattering. When love felt conditional, you learned to earn it. When presence was inconsistent, you learned to expect absence. When rejection felt unbearable, you learned to hide. The brilliance of these adaptations is also their curse. They keep playing long after the stage has changed. So now, as an adult, you may find yourself reciting old vows in new places, wondering why every relationship carries the same undertone, why every success tastes hollow. Think about it. Every time you hesitate before intimacy, it is not because you lack courage. It is because your body remembers that closeness once burned. Every time you downplay your achievements, it is not because you lack ambition. It is because your old vow whispers, if I shine too brightly, I will be seen, and if I am seen, I may be hurt. Every time you sabotage what you wanted most, it is not random self-destruction, it is loyalty to the survival map you drew as a child. In this way, what seems like madness is actually a kind of wisdom. What appears as chaos is really an old order still holding you in its grip. To see this is to soften. To recognize that your so-called flaws are pieces of your story that once carried you through impossible storms. The real suffering begins not in the vow itself, but in forgetting that you made it. If you forget, you end up thinking this is simply who you are, that you are cold or distant, or incapable of sustaining love. You identify with the armor and mistake it for skin. But armor, no matter how polished, is not your essence. It is temporary, even if you've worn it for decades, and when you remember this, something profound shifts. The pattern stops looking like a curse and begins to look like a choice your younger self made to survive. And if it was a choice then, even if unconscious, it can be unchosen now. Not in one dramatic moment, but in the slow, patient act of meeting the child inside you with compassion rather than judgment. This recognition is not meant to dismiss the pain of repeating cycles. It is meant to remind you that you are not broken beyond repair. You are not destined to reenact the same heartbreak forever. You are a soul that once had to shield itself, and those shields are still doing their job, sometimes too well. By honoring them, by saying, I see why you did this, I see why you protected me, you begin the alchemy of release. The shield does not vanish in shame, it softens in gratitude. And from gratitude, new choices become possible. You begin to imagine intimacy without terror, closeness without loss, love without disappearing. That imagining is the beginning of freedom. And here lies the turning point. What once was survival has now become limitation. To keep carrying these vows unquestioned is to walk through life with a map drawn for a land you no longer live in. The storms you prepared for have passed, yet the umbrella is still open. The doors you locked are no longer threatened, yet the key remains hidden in your own hand. Healing then is less about destroying the armor and more about realizing you no longer need it. The younger you can rest, the present you can step forward, and in that movement the cycle begins to dissolve, not as punishment but as liberation. What happens when you finally see the patterns not as curses, but as echoes of survival? Something loosens. For the first time, you no longer carry the weight of blame. You stop asking, what is wrong with me? And begin to ask, what happened to me? And even more than that, you begin to ask, what did I create within myself to endure what happened? These questions are not accusations, they are invitations. Invitations to meet the hidden child within you not as a burden, but as a guide. When you see that every wall you built, every silence you kept, every mask you wore was born of love, love for your own survival. You begin to reclaim the tenderness that was never lost, only disguised. And it is here, in this recognition, that healing no longer feels like an unreachable dream. Healing becomes presence. It becomes the small moment when you notice you are safe now, that the danger is no longer here. It becomes the pause before you shut down, when you can whisper to yourself, "I do not need this shield anymore." It becomes the courage to let one person close, not because you are sure they will never hurt you, but because you are sure that even if pain comes, you will not abandon yourself again. This is the difference between surviving and living. In survival, you shrink to stay safe. In living, you expand, knowing safety is already within you. Perhaps the greatest revelation is this: you were never broken. You were never too much, never too needy, never too complicated. Those were illusions painted over you by the wounds of others. The truth is, you have always been whole, just hidden beneath the layers of survival you once needed. Every scar on your heart is not a mark of weakness, but a testimony of endurance. Every silence you carried is not emptiness, but potential waiting to speak. Every wall is not a prison, but a doorway. Because once you see it as a doorway, you realize you can choose to open it. And so the invitation now is not perfection. It is not to erase the past or to promise you will never feel fear again. The invitation is simply to stay, to remain present with yourself even when tenderness feels risky, to let the inner child you once silenced finally take your hand and walk with you, to allow softness to return, not as something dangerous, but as something sacred. For this is what wholeness really means, not that you will never ache again, but that you will no longer mistake your ache for proof of your unworthiness. If these words have touched you, remember this: you are not here by accident. Something inside you has been waiting for this message, and you answered the call. That means you are already on the path, already closer to yourself than you think. Stay close to that truth. Let it echo in your day, and if you feel this resonance matters, stay with us. Subscribe not because of an algorithm, but because your inner child will keep speaking, and together we will keep listening. So let me leave you with this: you were never broken, only hidden, and now you are being found.